What's the worst thing to do in a relationship? I couldn't help but be the nice guy, even when she got a train ran on her. I caught my girlfriend cheating on me with another guy. But he's just as shocked as I am, so I made him feel at home. I'm coming home from work 3 days ago to find my girlfriend laying in bed with another guy. My initial response was to freak out and ask what was going on. How could she do this to me? No matter what she says, I'll still be furious. When I asked what my girlfriend was doing in bed with another guy, the guy flared up in disbelief, shaking and looking at me frantically before yelling out, "Has your boyfriend?" My girlfriend turns around to say she planned to tell him. I could only help but feel bad for him. He had no idea and she was the only one at fault here. Under rage and complete disappointment, I had the urge to kick them both out, but I ended up only kicking out my now ex-girlfriend. I told the guy to calm down and told him to stick around. I assured him I wouldn't hurt him and to prove that I offered him a beverage, which he accepted. We ended up talking and it turns out she had mentioned she was single and had no plans for a commitment. At this point he was still panicking. It took a while, but after a couple of hours talking and hearing out his side of the thing, he seemed to become a little bit more calm. I'm obviously still furious. Deep down, even though I know he's not guilty, I still couldn't look him in the eyes. Yet I felt some sort of pity. I couldn't just kick him out in his super awkward and uncomfortable moment. I managed to be nice by putting myself in his shoes. He ended up leaving more relaxed and relieved. I didn't intend on hurting him. It's safe to say I'll never see him again, but I think I at least made the right choice despite having my world upside down. Me and him met up today for lunch, and we talked about how it all started and how long it went on for. It made so much more sense. It started back in July of this year. At a time I wasn't home and was visiting family. She took advantage of the fact I wasn't home to find another man. He was super nice to me once again, saying that if he had ever known I was in the picture, he wouldn't have done anything. I asked how he didn't know about me, considering I own my own house and she lived with me. He told me that she had lied and said she lived with her parents so he couldn't visit initially. They'd meet up elsewhere like malls, coffee shops and so on. All this likely when I was at work, or too busy. I trusted her enough not to track her every movement. I'm not controlling. He said it started when she approached him at a bar near where I live. They had a night together and she left her contact with him shortly after. I'm appalled at how easily she went out and did that. Turns out he even asked her, at the very start, if she was in any situation that would cause issues. She said no. He showed me proof on his phone. He kept all the texts to prove that he did ask and that he had no clue me and her were a thing. I'm still furious, so I did the pettiest thing I could. I took a photo of the food me and him got together and intentionally posted it to my story with him in frame. I got a message from my ex shortly after asking if that was him. I won't be answering. I just want her to panic a little. I deserve a little harmless revenge. We both laughed at it and agreed to keep in contact. For now, this is where the story ends. My Hero Academia's most controversial character asks the fandom, "Can you be gay and homophobic?" My Hero Academia is a series that follows teenager Izuku Midoriya seeking to become a superhero. Donning the hero name Deku, he would quickly learn how to do so upon entering a hero academy for high school students, stopping numerous villains and country-ending threats along the way. With the series coming to an end, many have looked back on the franchise and began to note some rather polarizing plot points and characters. The most disturbing character by far being the boy infatuated with rope. Minoru Mineta is a classmate of Deku at their academy, Yuha High. While not completely insignificant to the story overall, he is relegated to a side character for most of the series. Though honestly, some fans may prefer he didn't show up at all. This can be easily understood when, during his first real scene in the series and after being saved by a female classmate from a villain attack, he compliments her assets and presses his face against her chest. He then proceeds to not so stealthily place his hands on her shortly after. Mineta plays a straightforward creep for most of the series, usually being punished immediately. When the boys and girls go to the sauna, Mineta attempts to climb the wall separating the two baths and join them. When he finds a hole peering into the girls' locker room, he wasted no time trying to peek. Over half of his dialogue has to do with his fixation on his female classmates, teachers, or pretty much any attractive girl in his vicinity. He even outright states he only chose to be a hero to impress girls. It doesn't help that he spends most of his early fights crying or screaming, which, while maybe understandable, only added to his long list of critics. To be completely fair, Mineta does still contribute more than just spouting creepy dialogue. His superpower only seems to be a joke at first but is used in a lot of creative ways. Mineta is portrayed as decently intelligent, and shreds some of his cowardice as the story progresses forward. He's clearly shown to be capable and willing to act on a plan to help his classmates even if those flashes of genius are immediately undercut by more disgusting acts. But with little screen time to develop or provide a more interesting foundation, his constant antics and creepy advances makes it very hard to feel anything for him. At least, not anything positive. The creator himself stated Mineta was based on his more creepy tendencies and tried to balance him carefully, understanding how poorly a character such as this could be received if it goes too far. But when you have thousands of fanfics with dedicated tags bashing the character, making him not a creep, or just erasing him from existence, then something probably isn't working. If this was a more professional essay, this would probably serve as a good lead-in to discuss the treatment of female characters in shonen, how different cultures view creepiness, or even further detail the creator's own failings and successes with his cast of female characters. Skipping ahead to just before the final battle, the Dark Hero arc is essentially the penultimate act of My Hero Academia. Following the disastrous fallout of the arc before this, Deku leaves Yuha High and attempts to hunt down the remaining big villains and master his abilities. Deku is eventually confronted by his classmates, including Mineta, who ask him to return to the high school and let them help in the final battle. Things come to a head when Deku attempts to flee, causing the group to chase after him. They do everything they can to slow him down, trying desperately to get him to listen to reason and trust them to help. After several near escapes and the combined powers of multiple students, Mineta manages to latch on to the hero-turned-vigilante using a chain of sticky balls and speaks. As the first translations hit Twitter, everyone could finally understand what Mineta told Deku. Mineta, I fell for you when you were scared and sweating buckets and quaking in your boots. Back when we found a path forward together. The way you were back then. Wait a second. I fell for you. That sounds romantic? And even the Japanese text indicated a more intense undertone. If Mineta is showing so much affection, then is he in love with Midoriya? And if he loves Deku, does that mean his entire character was actually the greatest deconstruction known to man? Reactions were swift. Many rejected their own romantic interests, unable to accept sharing anything in common with such a despicable creature. Others lashed out at the creator himself, angered at the audacity to have one of the most despised characters in the franchise be a member of the LGBT community. Just as surprising were the rare defenders of Mineta Proclamation, seeing this as a potential affair between two star-crossed lovers, coloring his interactions with Deku and the ladies in a new light. Reception was, ultimately, not positive upon hearing this news. While revealing your most creepy character harbored closeted feelings for the protagonist all along was definitely unexpected, it was also not the best way of showing representation. No one had a good answer to how fans should treat this development, and the fires would continue raging throughout the day. But as the dust began settling, more collected fans asked if this was actually true. Simply because it didn't really make any sense for such a big reveal to happen now, with these characters, after everything Mineta has done. People went back to the chapter and began analyzing the text to figure out one simple question. Is Mineta actually bi? No. No, he isn't. Turns out the English translation slightly mistranslated the original text. The original dialogue was more of a platonic show of support and encouragement rather than any dramatic confession. The phrasing and word choice just didn't quite match what the creator was going for. Disappointing to the 10 new Dekuneta fans out there, but much more logically sound than a love confession would be. And sure enough, Mineta would not act any differently towards Deku following these events. With that crisis averted, fans could go back to hating the character as much as they pleased. And with the Purple Devil pretty much sidelined in the story since, along with any chance to carry out his more egregious acts, it looks like the tyranny of the Great Boy has ended. Whether it be through fanfics, fan art, or written essays, the era of Mineta bashing has returned to its proper order. What is the grossest intimate experience you've ever had? In college I had a bit of a dry spurt, so I went to Craigslist to try and get some quick, easy intimacy. There were a bunch of bots that sent replies, and one actual girl who responded. She was 19 and described as a BBW, and boy was she right. When she sent her pic, it looked like she took up the entire bed. I mean, she was huge, at least 300 pounds and 6 feet tall. That night when she responded I told her I only had a couple hours, which she convinced me wasn't enough time, so we set up a session for later that week at her dorm. I made sure to set up the appointment during the day as I didn't want her to figure out my name from the security desk where you have to give your ID to go up into the building past the lobby. I get to her room and she answers the door, and Jesus Christ is she huge. Easily makes me look like a small guy, and she was taller too, maybe 6'4". It felt like I was Princess Leia with APP about to stick it into Jabba's sand womanhood. Holy F, what was I getting myself into? We sit on her bed and have some awkward small talk. She whips out a bowl and we get intoxicated. Once this happens, I whip my beast out and she gets to work. This was honestly the best neck I've ever received. She did everything perfect. If everything that happened after didn't happen, I would have called her forever for brain. Eventually, though she said she wants intimacy, I was not ready for what came next. She gave me a rubber, and as soon as I was going to get to work, this awful, foul stench seeped out of her womanhood. For a second I froze. All my instincts told me to get all my clothing on and run out of there. While I hesitated, she popped up and said, "Oops, forgot something," and went under her bed. From there she pulled out a giant, black and red tarp and laid it over the bed. What the F is this?" I asked. "I spray all the time, and might get some on you." Instinct to run. Gone. At this point I had never been with a sprayer, and even though this woman was foul in all other ways, I manned up and got in there. As I entered, the smell got worse, but I kept on trucking. Meanwhile she's honking and hollering and I am starting to gag. Literally gagging as I'm with this behemoth. I grab my shirt and wrap it around my face and it barely helps, but that little bit is keeping my lunch in my stomach, so I continue. After a while, she crossed the finish line. When she said she sprayed, she meant it. A geyser erupted. Juice literally exploded from her, and everything behind her was covered. Me, the tarp, the bedposts, the wall, her random goth band posters, her desk from the splash, my clothes on the floor the same way. I surveyed the damage for a second and momentarily freaked out. Jesus Christ, what the F just happened? "I'm not done," she replies. Without hesitation I jumped back in, and for the next 2 hours, she crossed the finish line over and over, and sprayed every inch of her room. She literally hit the effing ceiling at one point with her sprays. It was absurd and, while one of the grossest experiences of my life, one of the greatest as well. She was one of the most disgusting people I've ever met. I put my clothes on and left. I grabbed a bus back to my apartment. When I sat down, a couple people actually got up and moved to another seat cause I smelled so bad, but I didn't care. 3 months later I bought some substances from this kid and she knew him and came in during the deal. We went back to her room and she gave me neck. After that I never saw or talked to her again.